I'm not sure if it says something odd or bad about me, but Tenebrae, which is what this service is, the service of darkness, is actually my favorite of the special services that we do during the course of the year. I know that might seem odd because it's dark and it's drab and it centers around death, but I think there's something important there. When we come to church for Christmas, we've added things to the service. There's a special recognition and excitement and expectation, mainly for getting done with the service and then opening presents, right? That was a joke, all right. No, it's the expectation and excitement of a baby, the Christ child. It's a message of hope. For Easter, it's this glorious new resurrection that breaks into the old. When you go through Lent, similar things. Maundy Thursday, which we just observed, we also had First Communion for a whole bunch of kids. Advent is the same thing. I like Tenebrae because today or tonight, we're taking things away from you. We're removing things that you might have grown accustomed to, you might even enjoy from the service. The paraments, the fabric there are black. There's no color, there are no flowers, there are a few candles. There isn't necessarily the hyping up and this joyous expectation. Rather, it's a little darker. We'll pray the Lord's Prayer at the end in a whisper. And then Pastor Christensen and I will just walk out. We won't be out there shaking hands and wishing people a good week. Because I think it's a misnomer that we call it Good Friday. And there's some confusion, or scholars aren't totally sure why it's called Good Friday. There's some in the camp, and I'm not qualified, but I think I agree with them, that it used to be God's Friday. Not good, but God's Friday. In the same way that we used to say in English, God be with you, but that truncated to goodbye. That God's Friday eventually kind of evolved into Good Friday. To me, that makes a little more sense because this was not a good day. Crucifixion is one of the worst things conceivable that humans have in a systematic way done to other humans. Crucifixion wasn't even necessarily about the punishment of the person being crucified. It was something that would send a message. And Rome, the shadowy empire in the background of Jesus' death, was very good at sending this message. The famous slave revolt led by Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. Well, in real life, in response to that, when the Romans actually overtook the army of slaves along the Appian Way, a very famous Roman road, they crucified a slave every 35.2 yards for 120 miles. You can imagine merchants and travelers walking along the road, seeing these slaves gasping for air, sending a very clear message. You do not interfere with the interests of the empire. Now, we've kind of even romanticized crucifixion, as strange as that is. I have yet to see a crucifix that is historically accurate. The nails don't go through the hands, they go through your wrists, right where those bones connect. Because that way it'll actually hold on, and there's a nerve there that's supposed to be incredibly painful. That's why we get the word excruciating, X out of cross, crucifixion. It was named for that pain. Your feet were not, put on a platform. That's too much work for a Roman soldier. They would just drive the nail through your heel bones, one on either side with a plank in between, and then you'd suffocate to death over about 12 hours. It was a death by death by suffocation. And you wouldn't be raised up high above the ground. I mean, that makes for a nice cinematic effect. But Rome, as it turns out, isn't interested in the cinema. They want you to look in the eyes of this Roman threat. So you would be crucified at eye level in a very public place. And they reserved this for only the most dangerous, those threats to Roman interests, violent revolutionaries, leaders of rebellions, enemies of the state. Now, how a son of a Jewish carpenter from Galilee ended up there being crucified by the Romans is obviously a very long story. And we've been telling it and retelling it for 2,000 years, and we still haven't fully told the story of Jesus. But whatever else is going on, there is at least one thing to be said, that when you read these stories of Jesus going to his grave, you get this sense that these are all the powers of evil swirling together. You've got the power, or the power of evil that is power itself, domination over other people. It's corruption and greed. It's a lust for power, a willingness to sell yourself out and what you know is true to make things a little easier. There are many sins that quite literally get Jesus killed. And yet he does. The only one who would have been innocent dies a very brutal death. And creation itself shudders in response. Now, you may remember from Palm Sunday that when Jesus is riding on his donkey over the Mount of Olives and they say, "Jesus, will you tell these people to shut up?" He says, if they don't sing God's praises, then even the rocks will cry out. Well, sure enough, with Jesus' disciples scattered and hiding because they would be in trouble at that point if they were caught, there's nobody singing God's praises. And so when Jesus breathes his last, there's an earthquake. The sun itself goes dark. It's almost as though creation itself feels the shockwave of the death of its creator. This is a cosmic event that ripples. Now, when you look at the story of Jesus' life and what's all kind of going into it and how we can understand it, one of the important things that we should do is always ask, what kind of stories are they telling? About their people, about their lives, their culture. Just like if you would ask me, well, what kind of stories were you telling or being told when you were growing up? I'd say that's easy. My dad told me the stories of the Alamo, of the shootout at the OK Corral. Those good, hefty American stories. So what stories would a good first century Jew be told? Well, a lot of them, but one in particular I think is important. It comes from an era called the Maccabean Revolt. Jewish rebels managed to fight off their pagan oppressors. Well, eventually it catches up with them, at least a group, and we're told in this book called Second Maccabees that they are being executed in torturous ways. And as they've got their final hours of breath left, you know what they do? They do what I probably would do. They call down curses on the people who are torturing and killing them. They call down for God's violent vengeance. They tell these pagan overlords that they will get what's coming to them. We will have our vengeance. Now, I want you to hold that in your mind. And as we go through this service, and it gets darker and darker, think about the kinds of words that you hear Jesus saying. Things like, "Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do." A stark contrast to the stories that they all knew and they grew up with. Because he knew that he was being torturously executed in order to save the very people who were killing him. That he goes to his grave with the powers of evil exhausted. They do their worst, and even though they crush him, There's nothing left to do. I'm not going to tie this sermon together in a nice, neat knot, because I think one of the cool things about Tenebrae is that it doesn't. This service does not resolve very easily. But we do know that there's the rest of the story. That as evil exhausts itself on Jesus, it doesn't get the final word. And there's a reason why you will see the candle relit return to the altar. May we love Jesus all the more, knowing that he loved even with his dying breath, rather than giving in to that temptation of violence and vengeance. He loved even those who were driving nails into his skin, because that is what he was sent to do.